My name is Kira Westaway. I work at Macquarie University in the Department of Environmental Sciences. I'm under the umbrella of environmental scientist, but I actually see myself as what we call a geochronologist. So I try to date the timing of when things died or when climates and environments that have changed in the past. So I'm really inspired and engaged by explorers. So I'm really sort of inspired by people like, the James Cameron of the National Geographic world, people who like to just get out there and explore and find new things, finding the first and the biggest, and that's always been a kind of excitement for me. I love trying to address big questions that haven't really been answered. People shy away from those big questions, but I like to kind of address them and really go hard into trying to find an answer, even if it takes my whole research career to find the answer. Those are the kind of big challenges that I like to face. Usually with science, you go looking for one thing and you without knowing, you find something else. It's that kind of unknown. There's things that you don't know, and there's things that you don't even know you don't know. And with the Hobbit, it was one of those kind of unknown unknowns. We had no idea that we were going to find what we find. We were actually looking for evidence of modern humans in Flores Island. We'd found this cave, Liang Bua. It had a lot of potential because a priest called Verhoeven had dug there a few hundred years ago, and he'd found all these Neolithic burials. So he'd found a lot of evidence in that cave. It's an amazing cave. It's 16 meters of sediment. It's a real focus for the village. They used to have lessons in there from teachers who used to actually teach their class in there. And so it's a real focus of the community, but it had a lot of potential. So Professor Siono from Jakarta had done a little bit of research there, and he dug down about 3 meters, which is really as deep as you can safely go without any protection of the actual excavation itself. And he'd found a few interesting things, but he got to what we call a sterile level with no fossils. So Professor Mike Morwood was leading the project at the time. He thought this cave had a lot of potential. And Professor Mike Morwood's all about going down as far as you can. Like he basically says, if you don't hit bedrock, you don't know what's really there. Do you know what I mean? So he went down, and they actually did a grave digging course in Sydney, him and Professor Bert Roberts from Wollongong. They did a grave digging course in Sydney, and they worked out how to what we call shore, which is putting the wood structures around the excavation to make it safe. So they went from the 3 meters that Professor Siono had done and managed to dig down another 3 or 4 meters, and that's when we actually found the Hobbit. So it was all about just getting down a little bit deeper, and obviously totally unexpected, did not have a clue what we'd found. At first we thought it was a child because it was very small, but then as we pulled it out, we realised that the wisdom teeth were not only erupted, they were out, and they were actually quite worn. So there's no way this could have been a child. And then we were like, what on earth do we have here? We go looking for modern humans, and we find a new species of human, which is often what happens with science. You just don't know. You've just got to kind of keep yourself open to the unexpected. So with the Hobbit, Homo floresiensis, we knew it was going to be controversial. We knew that it was going to be very tough to get scientists to accept that this was not only a new species of human, but the actual age range at which it was found. So we knew it was going to be tough. So we knew with this kind of thing, you only really have one chance to nail it. People are very unaccepting, and they're very critical, and you have to really present a watertight case. So for me, doing the chronology, we knew that one dating technique was not going to be enough to convince people of the age. So we collected sediments from around the skeleton for luminescence dating. We also collected burnt pieces of charcoal for radiocarbon dating, and we also actually dated the bone, the fossil itself, using uranium series in a kind of a modelled way to make sure that we could really incorporate what was going on in the cave. So 3 or 4 dating techniques. We looked at the context, we looked at the climate in which they were living, we looked at the archaeological context, because we didn't just find a skeleton on its own, we found it within what we call a living floor. So that floor, you could see stone tools, you could see bone, you could see hearths where they'd been using fire, and they were all on one surface. I mean, we had excavators that were actually digging, actually cut the hands on some of the stone tools. They were still so sharp, 50,000 years later, that it was almost like you could almost picture the hominids actually sitting there and eating and, butchering the bones and cooking, and crazy experience to see that. So funny enough, when we do a lot of the dating, we do a technique called single grain, which is the machine behind me here. And rather than just take a group of grains and work out the age from those group of grains, we can actually now work out the age from one single grain. So we have a laser that we fire directly at one tiny little quartz grain, almost too small to see by the naked eye. And we fire a laser at that grain, and that grain can tell us its age. Now, because we do that for multiple grains, so 100 grains on each disc, and we do multiple discs, we actually get some statistics. We actually get some data which we can actually look at. And from that, we can work out which grains were well bleached, so reset to zero before they entered the cave and were buried, and which grains actually had what we call a remnant dose. So they actually had a little bit of luminescence that was left over because they weren't properly bleached from the last time. And by analysing that data using statistical methods, certain models that we use, we can actually work out which grains are going to give us the optimum or the true burial age for that sediment. So originally when we did the dating, the ages came out for the Hobbit skeleton of about 18,000 years. So we were like, really, wow, we've got this crazy piece, skeleton that has archaic features plus more modern features, and it was only around 18,000 years ago. How on earth are we going to explain this? So we presented the data in what we had. Most of the community accepted it, some didn't. And then we did another 10 years of excavations after that. And then we realised that what we were actually looking at was the skeleton bones were actually eroding out of an older bank of sediment, and where we had excavated down, the bones looked like they were being surrounded by this younger sediment. So we'd collected the sediment dating, and we got this 18,000-year-old age. It wasn't until we actually dated the fossils themselves. Obviously, it's a halotype of a species, so people are not keen to kind of use it for dating, But we managed to actually do some dating on the fossils themselves and realise that the fossils were actually more like 50 to 60,000. And then when we dated this older bank of sediment behind, we found this older unit that was about 50 to 60. So we actually changed our perspective on the dating, mainly because, with science, you make an assessment or interpretation based on the data that you have. If you get new data, you are valid and allowed to actually then make a reinterpretation. You just put your hand up and say, do you know what? Based on what we had then, we had that age, but now we have this new information. We are allowed to put our hand up and say, actually, we think it's actually this. And this is how science progresses, is when people make reinterpretations on things. It's not like you make one interpretation, it's set in stone for life. There's always new interpretations that can come from a new analysis or new data. So with single grain dating, we collect a lot of data, sometimes thousands and thousands of grains, each with their own signal measurement. But it's quite surprising how many grains actually don't luminesce. So sometimes it can be as low as 5% of the grains actually give a luminescent signal. All the other grains don't give any signal at all. So we have to try and filter out the grains that don't give a signal. So we have a very stringent, what we call a rejection criteria. And we kind of work through the data and reject the grains that don't give a true luminescent signal or anything that's going to cause a problem. And then we're left with what we call the accepted grains. And from those accepted grains, we have to try and work out which grains on which end of the distribution are actually going to give us the ones that's closest to the true age. And we run what we call a minimum age model through that data set, and that just takes into consideration the age of each grain, but also the error range. So whenever we're looking at ages, we never just look at what we call the median age, so 20,000. We always look at the range of that result. So it would be 20,000 plus or minus 5. That would be the actual error range that we look at. So when we do run this model, it incorporates all the error ranges and how precise or each result is, and then from that we can actually isolate the grains that we think have been the ones that are most bleached, which are most accurate for the age that we're trying to establish. So I'm a really strong believer in that science is for everyone. I don't believe that that, you know, we are in this ivory tower and that the public can't communicate or connect with this science. So I'm all about breaking down the barriers and making science accessible to everybody. And it's just about breaking down the jargon. Luminescence dating, it's very, very heavily jargonized, you know, everything we talk about is jargon. It's just about breaking it down and making it accessible to people. So for luminescence, I just talk about a light-sensitive signal that is removed by daylight and that builds up during burial. It doesn't have to have all that excess jargon. It doesn't have to be over-complicated for people to really understand. So I don't shy away from talking about luminescence because I think that your average general public can actually handle the science. They just need to have it in an accessible format. So and I don't want to detract from the excitement. So I want people to be involved in the discovery and involved in the dating, but you've just got to be able to make it accessible. The Hobbit, we actually have 3 papers, and they all were in Nature. I was kind of co-author on those 3 papers because I was contributing the dating. But there was a huge team of scientists that all worked on it. We had geochronologists, we have archaeologists, we have paleoanthropologists, all working together. And this is what I love about the science. It's very interdisciplinary. There's no barriers with disciplines. Everybody all kind of works together. Everyone is an expert in their own field, and we all contribute the data to get the result that we want. So it's a really huge team effort. Science to me is one of the most amazing, fascinating, challenging things I've ever done. I mean, luminescence dating is the hardest thing I've ever done in the whole of my life. It's incredible. I know people, professors have been doing it for, 40 years, and they still say we're scratching the surface and not understanding. So it's incredible. It's challenging. Anyone that's interested in science, I think it's the interest that's going to be the key, because it's about curiosity. It's about feeling curious about something and wanting to know the answer. Everything I do in science is driven by wanting to know the answer. People say to me, why do you do all this dating in China? Why do you go to Indonesia and go this digging in caves? It's because I want to know the answer. It's not because I want to use the information and write papers and do all this. I genuinely want to know when humans first arrived in Southeast Asia. And I want to, there is an element that I want to turn science on its head a little bit. I like, going against the accepted, ideas. I don't like anything that's accepted. If people say, oh, modern humans didn't arrive in Southeast Asia till 45,000, I like to turn that on the head, with my paper in Sumatra and push it right back to 73 to 63. Just try and put the cat amongst the pigeons, turn science over. People get a little bit complacent in science and they kind of say, this is our understanding and this is what we're going to stick with. But no, come up with something that completely changes that, and that's a really exciting goal in science, to try and turn the accepted on its head.